too long. This is probably more for the Finance Minister than for the officers at the table, although anybody obviously is welcome to chip in. Minister, can you walk us through your involvement in major funding announcements by the government? I want to bring your attention to a specific example in a sec. You can probably guess which one. But in the meantime, as the chief watchdog of government expenditure, what's your precise role?
Well, my role is, in terms of announcements, is therefore to say it's a matter of public record which announcements I got involved in and which ones I haven't.
No, it's not so much announcements. It's.
But you said public announcements, I thought. I thought you asked me about my involvement in public announcements.
Expenditure.
In terms of expenditure. My role is to ensure that government expenditure is as efficient and as effective as possible and delivers against the priorities of the government.
All right, thank you. That's concise. Would it be normal? Well, the other thing I guess I wouldn't mind you explaining to me is at what point the ERC is involved in major spending announcements and
spending announcements. So you say announcements?
No, just. I know you're probably just as eager to get to the point as I am, but announcements and deliberation around what goes ahead and what doesn't.
Well, any allocation of, any decision to make expenditure or to incur expenditure in relation to new policies is considered by the Expenditure Review Committee in the appropriate way, and it's based on advice from relevant department and with costings information verified by my department, and a decision made in the end by the Expenditure Review Committee and by the Cabinet.
All right, and that's right across the whole of government. There's nobody sort of beyond your reach or your remit, is there, within the Commonwealth public sector?
Well, any federal government allocation of expenditure through the budget process is based on a decision by government, that's right. And it's based on a decision by government which is informed by advice from the relevant departments and by the central agencies, PM&C, Treasury and Finance.
And Finance, okay, thanks. So it'll probably focus this conversation to talk of a specific example. No guesses for, no prizes for guessing which one. The Commonwealth made an up to $1.2 billion funding commitment for the Perth Freight Link, and we heard from officers in the Infrastructure Department yesterday that at the time that funding commitment was given, there was no business case. The project didn't have environmental or Aboriginal heritage approval, no cost-benefit analysis had been conducted, and the overall route of the project hadn't been determined. So step me through, from your point of view as Minister, your department and the ERC, how a decision like that can be made unilaterally, and then what has to happen after an announcement like that has been done with all that due diligence having been carried out?
Well, firstly, I disagree with much of what you've said there. It certainly wasn't a unilateral announcement or unilateral decision. The Perth Freight Link project fundamentally is a combination of the long-standing Row 8 extension and what was initially a plan by the previous government to make certain upgrades to surface road upgrades to Stock Road and other roads that you know in the area. The federal government, when we came into government, decided to support this important project, which incidentally was identified by Infrastructure Australia as a very high transport priority, very high infrastructure priority, and that's of course an independent assessment. We decided to support that project in 14-15, but at a state level in Western Australia there were considerations on whether the second stage of that project should be implemented as a surface road upgrade or whether it would be more desirable to do that by way of a tunnel. You'd be aware that the decision that was made by the state government in Western Australia was to proceed with a tunnel. Further funding was sought from the federal government, and the federal government made a decision to allocate the necessary additional funding to take the total contribution to $1.2 billion. And as I say, this is a very significant project which will help reduce congestion across the South Metropolitan region. It will improve safety. It will reduce the cost of moving freight
Minister,
across the metropolitan. I'm answering your question.
No, you're not. You're answering
It will reduce the
ask.
cost of moving freight across the metropolitan area, and it will improve the amenity for communities across the South Metropolitan area of Perth. And as you would be aware, because you live in Western Australia, it is a project which has got very strong public support, which was demonstrated not least by the survey in the Sunday Times, which was participated in by 9,000 readers of the Sunday Times, 60% of which supported the project, only 10% of which did not support the project, with 30% of respondents undecided. So it is a very important project. It's a project which has got very strong public support, and the government stands by the decisions that we've made to make the biggest ever federal investment in a single infrastructure project in Western Australia ever, as a significant contribution to economic growth and improved lifestyles in Western Australia and nationally.
You done?
Well, I've answered your question to the
You've
best of my
answered
ability.
a dozen questions I didn't ask. I'm trying to keep it to process. If you've just said that it was the largest single infrastructure commitment to the state of Western Australia, is that?
That's right.
That's how you phrased it?
That's right.
How could you have possibly made such a commitment without a business case or a cost-benefit analysis have been conducted? Is it just done on the basis of trust?
No, that's not right. We based the decision on all of the relevant and necessary advice.
In what year did Prime Minister Abbott make that funding commitment?
Well, we made the commitment in the 2014-15 budget, and the consideration of that budget measure went through the usual process, including advice from the Department of Infrastructure and the central agencies, and the government made a decision. We are very comfortable with the decision we've made. We are totally committed to the project. It is a great project. It is one that is long overdue. It is one that should have been implemented many, many years ago. It is more expensive than it should be because of the outrageous decision that was made by Alana McTiernan as a former WA Transport Minister when she sold the land for the Fremantle Eastern bypass.
This is a little bit of a waste of the committee's
time. That is why it is more expensive than it should have been. It's very important context. I mean, this is a project which will create more than 10,000. It's a project which will deliver more than 10,000 jobs, direct and indirect jobs. So it's a very important project.
I'm so bitterly familiar with these talking points. If you could just keep your answers to the scope of the questions I'm asking, this will go heaps faster. When the funding commitment was made, Minister, what I'm trying to do is square this very orderly process of evaluation that you've described to us with the process for funding and announcing the Perth Freight Link, which was completely arse backwards as far as I can tell.
Well, that is your opinion, but I disagree with that opinion.
When the funding commitment was made, did you or Prime Minister Abbott have a completed business case?
The process of assessment went through all of the appropriate. Through all of the appropriate channels. It was considered in the appropriate fashion. I
just asked a really direct question.
And of course, you've been pursuing, I think 6 or 7 orders through the Senate now, and
you've denied all of those.
Well, that's not right. We've provided as much information as we could provide without harming the public interest.
I'm not asking for the documents here.
And of course, including the business, that part of the business case which could be publicly released has been publicly released.
Yeah, I understand that. Did you or the Prime Minister, Mr Abbott at the time, have those documents at the time the funding decision was made?
I take on notice what specific documentation was in front of government.
How could you not know?
Well,
did you have a cost-benefit analysis?
Well, you're obviously asking me questions now about 2014, and I'll take on notice to make sure the answers I provide are 100% accurate.
If the problem with that, Minister, is that my next question now has to be hypothetical because that was a yes-no question. If that funding decision had been made without access to either a cost-benefit analysis study or a business case, would that have violated your normal due processes that you were describing to us before?
Well, I don't agree with your assessment. I don't agree with the premise of your question.
I know, just asked a simple question.
Yeah, no, but sure. But like, as I've indicated to you, the decision to invest $1.2 billion in this very important infrastructure project for Western Australia went through all of the appropriate processes of government. It is a project which is long overdue, and we look forward to it being completed as soon as possible by a re-elected Barnett government.
I think you might be in for a bit of a disappointment, but that's also outside the scope of this committee, I suppose. Minister, how can it be within the normal processes of evaluation and deliberation when you still don't know how the freight link is going to get to the port? I'm struggling to square the description that you made of an orderly process of evaluation with the shambles that we're witnessing, where the project still doesn't get all the way to Fremantle.
Well, I completely disagree. I mean, I've heard you make that very strange argument many times. Well, that is, you're wrong.
The infrastructure officers confirmed that yesterday. They confirmed it.
Let me explain this to you, right? Let me explain it. You've asked a question, so if I can answer it for you.
Just try to stick to the question I asked.
I'm going to answer the very precise question. So right now, a lot of trucks, thousands and thousands of trucks that currently are going through the suburbs, will be taken off suburban arterial roads and onto a dedicated highway. This means 12 and a half minutes faster travelling time to the port precinct. It means 14,000. It means that the trucks don't have to stop at about 14 lights that they've currently got to stop on, which means less wear and tear, which also means less CO2 emissions, incidentally. It means increased safety. Now, Senator Ludlam is then saying, but hang on, so the faster, better, more efficient highway then finishes, that improved road finishes 3 kilometres out from the Fremantle port. But
it's about 2.
But he then suggests, he's making that argument as if there's no road there at all, as if this highway arrives in a desert. If it arrives somewhere where all of a sudden the trucks have got to sort of somehow get wings and fly to the port. No. There are actually existing roads. And all of the trucks that will be able to use the better, faster, safer, more efficient highway, instead of going through the suburbs and stopping at 14 red lights along the way, all of those trucks will arrive at the same road infrastructure that is currently there. Now, would it be preferable if we had even better road infrastructure for the final 3 kilometres? Yes, and I'm sure that one day that will happen. Maybe one day the tunnel, which is part of the Perth Freight Link project, will be extended under the river all the way. But the proposition that somehow the Perth Freight Link runs from the end of Kwinana Freeway and then stops in the middle of the desert, and then all these trucks don't know how to get to the port is false. That is the proposition, the way it's being circulated through the media by the Greens. The truth is that all of these trucks that are currently arriving at this bit of road for the final 3 kilometres will still arrive at that final 3 kilometre bit of road, and they will have arrived there 12 and a half minutes earlier, not having had to stop at 14 traffic lights along the way, meaning less wear and tear, meaning less CO2 emissions, meaning better amenity, better safety, less congestion, more jobs, and of course this is the perfect time to build this road, because construction activity in Western Australia is less than what it has been, given that the mining construction boom has come to a close. And so this is a perfect time to build the Perth Freight Link, and I certainly hope that it will be built as soon as possible after the state election on March 11.
You done, Senator Ludlam?
So done.
Thank you.